delighted to be here today, and I thought that we might play a little game called Do You Remember? Now, for those of us who grew up in Collierville and have been here most of our lives, we pride ourselves on remembering. The older you are, the more you may remember. So I'll start out with a question, and let's just see how much you do remember. Do you remember when the closest library to Collierville was on Main Street or Front Street in Memphis? It was the Cosset Library, and it was like a castle to a child who walked in with her father to see all of those stacks and the high ceilings, and had a little bit of a dark feeling to it. So it was like visiting a castle, but it was all the way to the river to find a library. Do you remember the bookmobile? Well, I do. Now, I don't remember when it started, because it started in 1933, and it was run by the Shelby County Library. It came to Collierville once every 2 weeks, and it made a regular turn around the county, so it touched many of the small communities. When I remember it, the driver was Mr. Clark. And Mr. Clark would pull up on the square, on the north side of the square itself, would open the bookmobile, and we could then find us some books to enjoy for the next 2 weeks. In the summertime, he might have as many as 150 people. In the wintertime, he might get 50. That was our books that were sent out by Shelby County. Now, we also had a library in our elementary school. Well, no, let me take that back. We had a library in our school. Our school was 1st grade through 12th grade in the same building. So we had one small section in that library where we could go and look at books. Do you remember when the Contemporary Club decided that Collierville needed a library? Now, I will tell you that the bookmobile no longer came, that the Shelby County library system was no longer funded at that point, so there were no books being brought into our community. They decided that we needed a library. Those ladies had a vision for what our community needed to be. And you have to understand that in '56, I don't know exactly what the population was, but it was very small. I would say maybe 2,000 people. I don't really know. But there was no library, and they wanted their children to have a library. So when you get a group of women that make up their mind to something, then something happens. And in this case, it did. They pulled in the Collierville government. They pulled in other clubs in our community, and through their enthusiasm and determination, we got a library. Do you remember March the 5th, 1956, when our first library opened? Well, I do. It was in a very small, white, stucco building that was at the corner of Walnut and North Rowlett. It had been a little hamburger joint. And my mother used to say that she thought at first she got more customers who liked the smell of hamburger and onions, which lingered in the building, than they did in the books that they came in to check out. But needless to say, that library was established. The husbands made the shelves. They had approximately, I've seen two different numbers, 1,500 to 2,000 books in the whole building. And if you think about how things have changed, back then you filled out your form and you got a library card, and when you came in to check out your library book, you had to write your name on the card, and it was stamped, and that card was filed by date, so that when you brought your book back, then they could find your card and you were ready to go again. The card catalog was literally a set of drawers, very narrow drawers, where if you wanted to look up a book, you could find it by author, or you could find it by the name of the book, or you might find it under a subject area. But it was all done by your fingers walking through the files of the card catalog. The library had one employee, which was my mother, and they were open from 2 to 6 on Monday and 2 to 9 on Friday. Now, on Friday nights, my dad would come up and work the dark hours. After the sun went down, then his job was to come in and work those few hours until then. We had one lady, Mrs. O.C. Dean, that was on the Memphis and Shelby County Board of the libraries, and Mrs. Harold was president of the Contemporary Club at that time. Well, do you remember when the library moved? I do. They decided that the little white building was not large enough for a library anymore, and the town was then working with Memphis and Shelby County Library, and so we had some funding and we had some books that were brought out by them. So now we were beginning to expand, but the only place they could find to expand was the actual lot that the little white building was on. So up just west of it was a Victorian house. They decided to move the library from the white building to the Victorian house. My father taught at the high school, so he had some volunteer labor that was available to him, some of the young men in town, and he rigged up a cart where you could take a whole section of books off of the shelf, put it into the cart that was shaped like a shelf, move it up to the Victorian house, take it out, put it back on the shelf, and they were all kept in order. So the boys from the high school came down, they loaded the books onto those kind of carts, took them to the Victorian house, and put them back on the shelf so that we were, I don't know what the downtime was, but it wasn't very much. They got it done fairly quickly. So they moved those books. They came in and tore down the little white building. And in 1965, December of 1965, we had our new library. And that's the way we all referred to it. Do you remember the new library? I do. We as a town were so excited because we had a brick building with big windows that gave you a view of the outside. Now, there was no delightful room for the children to have story hour, so they would go in. The other side of the building was a community room, and they would move into that community room, and that's where they would have story hour. We also used that community room for the book sale, which was much, much, much smaller than we have now, but we were able to use the community room for that kind of thing too. This library was open 6 days a week. There were no computers, there were no videos, there were no tapes, there were no CDs, but there was always the story hour. So again, when you move from 1965 to what we have today, it is amazing. Later on, that building was enlarged so that they had a much more inviting area for the children. That was primarily what they did, was in the little annex that they built, they had an area that was more for the children. But the interesting thing, and I think it probably is true today, was that the library was one of the first places that people went when they moved to our community. And it's still fun today to hear people say, oh, I went in and your mother was one of the first people that I met. And I think that for the library to be a meeting area like that is so very important. Well, lastly, do you remember when our present library opened March the 3rd, 2001, and it was called the big library by those of us who watched the progression. This was the big library. And it was so wonderful to come in and to see the children's room, to see it as a center of learning, and to watch now as things have changed. And and I will have to say, I've had to have some help, but using the computer to find the books I want, or the self-checkout, or the information programs that are done, the genealogy information that is available, programs on television that you can, or on your computer that you can get into because you have a library card. It truly is a center of information, not just a book library. And that's a wonderful thing, and it has been so exciting to see the library grow over the years, and even the friends of the library. Back years ago, we might have 4 or 5 at a meeting, and now we'll have 30. We have close to 100 people who volunteer for the book sale. We have our bookstore here now that does a great business thanks to donations, but it's still a library that is dependent on people and on people being a part of what's going on. So I have wonderful, wonderful memories of the library and the way it has grown in Collierville. I'm just so delighted to be a part of it and to see how wonderful it is now. Thank you.